Welcome to the Bridge of Two podcast. Welcome back to the Bridge of Two podcast, ladies and gentlemen.
Hey.
Act like you own the place.
There you
go. So this is Josh, your usual host, and this is...
John.
John, yes. John is here. He is filling in for Jeremiah, who, is just...
Yeah, where is he?
Abandoned everything that he stood for. No, I'm just kidding. Totally kidding. Have to give you a little bit of a hard time there, Jeremiah. Life got busy, and he needed to take care of some things, and so he said go for it with getting John in here. And who helped us out on the Prince Caspian episode last year, almost a year ago.
Has it really been that long?
It was May.
Wow.
It was May. And,
so much has happened.
What's funny is we're about to start continuing the Narnia reread or the Narnia read through because we haven't read them.
Well,
again, we're going to pick up with Dawn Treader because I think we were doing Dawn Treader. Jeremiah's school was crazy because he was like finishing, had all these clinicals, and he was working and stuff. So we did some easier episodes that didn't require reading the whole book, and then we did the Star Wars Obi-Wan show.
Right.
And then we just did the Rings of Power show, and then it just got us through the end of the year, and then we just haven't gone back to it yet. So
sure.
But yeah, so thanks for coming on, John. And
thanks for having me. I'm
answering the call. The call of the Bridge of Two.
There you
go. Sacred brotherhood.
I took a blood oath before I came on the show, so yeah.
Yes, he has done all the rituals required. But yeah, so let's get right into our usual format. We're going to be doing our sci-fi and fantasy things we've been doing this week, and then we're going to talk about our main topic, which is going to be the hero's journey.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be just talking about the hero's journey, what that is as a storytelling structure that was kind of been identified as like this very often repeated storytelling structure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it'll be a lot of fun to talk about.
Yeah, this is a really interesting topic.
Yeah. And, as you're listening to it, you'll be starting to think of your own stories and movies and things that you love and be thinking about, oh, that's what that is. It's very fun. But yeah, so let's get into it.
Cool. So as far as recent sci-fi fantasy stuff, I've been trying to push myself to read new stories and just to really get into the rhythm of reading some fiction more often.
Okay.
I realized that I've been kind of slacking off on that, textbooks have been really my reading. I know. So what I've been doing is basically I've just been trying to read occasional short stories. I really like Flannery O'Connor. I've been reading some of her. She's
awesome.
Not sci-fi or fantasy, but she's a good writer and everything, and a lot of her stories are widely available. But two science fiction ones that I read so far. One was by Isaac Asimov called Nightfall, which is a very interesting short story. That one's basically, the plot is that there's this distant planet that constantly gets sunlight, and the society of aliens.
The entire planet?
Yeah, the entire planet constantly gets sunlight. There's no night.
Oh, okay.
So, ironic title, but...
Right.
So there are these aliens that build this society. They are pretty much people for all intents and purposes in the story. But what they realize is that there's this cult on their planet of people who believe that the end times occur when night falls, basically. And for a while that was considered just a myth, and it was the story of a dragon swallowing their planet and causing darkness and all that stuff.
Stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Come to find out, the scientists of their planet discover that actually there's a total eclipse that happens about every few thousand years. And the archaeologists of the planet discover that when that happens, for some reason, societies and civilization has basically burned down every time there's been a nightfall. And so it's really interesting. But
because of the mythology?
Well, so that's the thing, is that they're discovering that the science and the academia side of it is actually cohering pretty well with the the cult's mythology, basically. So nightfall does happen every few thousand years, and it kind of does cause the end of their civilization. And so they think at first that it's because their species is not adapted to the daylight, that they go insane or something like that.
To the daylight, you mean the nighttime?
I'm sorry. Yes. Yeah. It's in the nighttime. I apologize. Yeah, they think their species is not adapted to the nighttime because they're constantly in daylight. And over the course of the story, you get little hints of where their science is, and they believe that their universe is very small and that they're kind of the center of the universe and that sort of thing. Come to find out, it's not actually the nightfall that causes the problem. At the very end, they realize that when the nightfall occurs, their sky is suddenly lit up with billions and billions of stars, and they realize that they're not at the center of the universe, basically. And so that causes them to go insane. So it's an interesting story. You know, Isaac Asimov is famous for like iRobot, you know, and that kind of thing. You know, earlier science fiction writer, but it's very interesting the way that he pulls that off, and kind of a little spoiler alert there for the end, but it's
spoiler for Nightfall.
Yeah, there you go. It's exciting nonetheless.
Spoilers for Nightfall. There's stars.
Yeah.
In space.
Who would have thought? Right?
Not the aliens.
Yeah, right.
That's interesting though.
Yeah. And so the other one that I was reading was by the older, again, a sci-fi author called Cordwainer Smith was his name.
Okay.
And he has a book called The Game of Rat and Dragon. And it's another science fiction thing. You know, as people are traveling between planets, they realize that in order to do so, they need to develop a kind of hyperspace where they can kind of peel outside of reality and reappear somewhere else. But what they find out is that there are beings in that hyperspace that they can't perceive that can kill them. Very powerful beings. They call them the dragons. And so what they do in order to try and create a sort of defense for these dragons is that they actually have to telepathically pair a pilot with a cat, because the cats can alert them early when that's happening. It's a really funny story, but it's really interesting also. And so basically the cats give the telepathic person this signal for when to activate a bomb that'll kill the dragons. And so it's called The Game of Rat and Dragon, because the cats perceive the aliens as rats and we perceive the aliens as dragons. And so that's what they do, is they go into hyperspace as people are traveling to protect them, and they play the game of Rat and Dragon, where these aliens show up and the cats have to alert them real quick when they need to activate this bomb to kill the dragons. And it's funny, you know, the way that the characters play off, and you know, every telepath in the story has a cat sidekick, which is kind of like them, you know, and it's really fun.
So when you were saying that about telepathically pairing, I thought you were going to say with another person or something, because the movie Pacific Rim, I don't know if you've ever seen it or heard of it.
I haven't. I've heard of it. Yeah.
So they have to pair telepathically in order to like share the neural load of piloting these huge mechs.
Oh yeah,
you know, and so but that went in a completely different direction.
Yeah, no, it's a little cat in their own little cat spaceship that sort of goes
in their own little
cat spaceship that's kind of like in tow with the psychic, you know, the telepath spaceship.
Oh my word,
it's great. Yeah.
I need to find some like art from that, some illustrations.
Oh, I'm sure somebody's gone crazy with that. Yeah,
that's hilarious.
It's a great story.
Nice.
What about you?
Well, I was writing like a lot, and now I'm not. So that's been weird. But trying to get back to it now to do some editing of the book that I was working on previous to Mithril. Things getting serious with Mithril. So just had one of those sessions recently, which was hard because I'm super cold, like in terms of the feel of the story and everything. I'm getting back into you know, where I left off and what's the story about and all those things, not knowing it, but just like the feel of it. Didn't get a whole lot done that session, but good to be back looking at it. And then I don't remember if I talked about this in the last episode. I just finished Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson not too long ago, like maybe a week ago. And that was really good. I love Brandon Sanderson books. I I don't know that I've actually even taken a break from reading him since I started a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I've read other books, but I've always kind of been working on one of his as well. But all that being said, this is a really good book. Like this is, if someone was like, I'm never going to pick up Way of Kings because it's way too big, or maybe you're like, I don't want to read. Maybe you've heard this thing about the Cosmere that we keep talking about, this interconnected universe of books that he has, and you don't want to start reading that because then you're like, I have to read all 100.
Yeah.
This is a standalone. It's in the same universe, but it's a very good standalone. You don't need to read the other ones.
You don't need any context for that one.
No, you don't. It's so whimsical and fun, and yeah, the chapters are really short. It's very like easy just to go. I mean, it's not a short book. It's shorter compared to a lot of his, but it's just like a good normal sized novel that's just very unputdownable, and it hooked me really quickly, and when it hooked me, I didn't take a break, from it really.
That's good.
But yeah, so that was a really fun read. And actually, wasn't sure if I was going to mention it or not, but I'm reading through it with my wife. I got her to give me, I just like picked it up and just tricked her. Not really tricked her, but I was just like, sometimes I'll just pick up a book and start reading it just to see if I can get her hooked. And this actually hooked her, and she really likes it a lot, and she's really enjoying it. And it's nice. I enjoy reading to her. Especially when I know she's enjoying it. So,
would you say that that's like important? Like you and your wife reading together, a fiction story in particular.
It's not, maybe not a fiction story. Mm-hmm. It's always sharing stories that are meaningful. Mm-hmm. That's important to me. So I've introduced her to a lot of different movies, and we watch shows together and stuff. So it doesn't have to be a book, and we haven't read a ton of those together. We read through Harry Potter together.
Right.
And that was magical to experience that through her, like experiencing it for the first time.
It was magical. Good choice of words.
Yeah. But yeah, anyway, so that's basically it right now. I'm reading another book that's kind of adjacent to sci-fi fantasy. It's called Tolkien Dogmatics.
Interesting.
And this guy named, I think it was Austin Freeman, he researched Tolkien's letters, his like other things he wrote about like his Christian beliefs and things. And basically he has, in his own words, he's covering these like main Christian, dogmas, I don't know if dogmas is the right term, but like
doctrines,
doctrine of God, and on and on. It starts with God. That's where I'm at. But it's very interesting because Tolkien didn't do what C.S. Lewis did. He wasn't an apologist as well, and didn't have his, you can read books that Lewis actually was, compiled or radio shows that were compiled into books and really get a really firm grasp on, for the most part, where he fell in a lot of theological areas, right? Because he talked about it. Tolkien, didn't talk about it except in passing in letters and things he wrote to other people. And so it's basically taking those things and putting them together and saying, this is what Tolkien said about what he believes about this, that, and the other. Taking into account, of course, that he was Catholic.
Right.
He was a devout Catholic, and he agreed, with Catholic theology. So not necessarily trying to, I don't think the goal is not to have any big twists and turns as much as just to lay it out there of what he said about these doctrinal things. And I'm really looking forward to it. I've enjoyed it so far. And pretty much like the whole thing is like, it's not any commentary. It's not any, it's literally, here's two sentences and a footnote,
of where it came from,
at the end of the book, you can go, or their end notes. At the end of the book, you can go and find this chapter, and then and so it follows really smoothly, but you are reading things that were pulled from here. Here. Anyway, so.
Now you said it goes through like his letters and stuff like that. Does it kind of draw inferences from his like fiction? From like Lord of the Rings or Silmarillion or something like that?
Yeah, I read the opening like kind of forward to the book or something along those lines. Basically, it was just laying out like the methodology of what you're going to expect in there. And I can't remember. I mean, that talked a good deal about that. That was just the author talking about how those things can be seen, and I think it will draw on some of that. Of how because he did draw parallels between some of his characters and certain things, that he intentionally, he wasn't going for allegory or for real rigid symbolism, but there were some elements that he did intentionally in revision allow them, as he saw them kind of fitting in with certain things, allow them to be a little more clearly symbolic, because there's a line in the book I was reading. He said, that Tolkien imagined his world as being metaphysically Christian, not overtly Christian. It was pre-Christian in terms of history,
right?
But metaphysically, it was meant to be sort of the same world,
Things work the same way. The spiritual economy sort of works the same way, something like that, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, even in some ways. I mean, like he imagined like Middle Earth is like ancient England,
right?
Right. So in some ways, when he wrote the creation account, the Silmarillion, he was doing a loose interpretation of the creation account. Incorporating some angelology and stuff like that,
right?
But
it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah. So anyway, that's something I'm enjoying.
Cool.
To continue on.
What's that called?
Tolkien Dogmatics.
Oh, Tolkien Dogmatics
just came out recently too, I think.
Cool.
Yeah. So shout out to that.
Nice.
I don't know if I really have much more to talk about on that front.
Neither do I.
So we have some drinks. I was walking through Publix and I was like wanting to get a drink, get a beer that maybe I like to try new things, but I also like to feel good about the chances that I'm going to like it.
Right.
And so I pulled up this website, I think it's Beer Advocate or something, and I looked like the top rated beers. And this was the very top one, and it was in the store.
Okay.
And it looked good.
Nice.
It's a picture of a kid eating breakfast cereal, and it says breakfast stout, double chocolate coffee oatmeal stout. So I already thought it sounded good when I had seen it, but then when I saw it on the website, I was like, well, it's the top one and it's here. So because a lot of them weren't. So.
I love on the back, that first sentence there of the description. The coffee lover's consummate beer.
There you go.
That's quite the sentence there. So
I guess
I'm excited.
We're going to put it to the test, I guess.
Yeah.
Here, I'll open mine. All right. Cheers.
Cheers.
Clink. Go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay.
I'm just being weird letting it breathe. I don't know if that's necessary, but...
It's different. Not bad at all. Pretty smooth.
Huh.
Initially, it's kind of odd. It just tastes different. It's hard to place it.
I actually don't get a lot of really strong flavor.
Neither do I. Yeah.
I don't know.
It's kind of got that hoppy sort of aftertaste for a lot of these beers. But
yeah, not too bad. It's
yeah,
just slightly. It's definitely, like you said, smooth. I feel like I get the coffee a little bit, but
I'm not really getting the chocolate.
Yeah, double chocolate.
Yeah,
a little bit.
Half a chocolate.
Yeah, like a little bold to say double chocolate.
Yeah, right.
But we'll see. Maybe as we drink it.
Is it the consummate beer for you yet?
For me as a coffee lover, I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Maybe you're supposed to put coffee in it.
So I'm not a big
It's not bad.
beer drinker myself.
Yeah.
I don't really drink a lot of beer. So it's just different. Not something I would probably normally just pick out for myself, but
what would you normally pick out if you were picking out?
I mean, whenever I drink, and I don't drink often, but whenever I do, I usually go with something like rum or maybe a liquor like a whiskey.
Something that does the trick a little quicker.
Liquor's quicker. I don't know. No, not really. No, I just like the only time that I drink. I almost never drink whenever I'm out at a restaurant. I basically have my drinks at home at night, like
just like a shot of rum before bed.
Yep, that's basically it. Just chill out a little bit.
Yeah.
If you have like Kahlua, you mix it into a little coffee or something and just kind of sip at it. So yeah. I mean, I don't really crack open a cold one. So it's different. Yeah, it's not bad.
No, it's not. And maybe that's the magic of it.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's also 8.9%. I think.
Right. It's actually fairly high for beer, but fairly low for anything else, I think.
Yeah, 5% is about normal for beer. But stouts, I think stouts tend to be a little higher.
Okay.
I've had stouts that are like 11, 13%, that sort of thing. There's another stout that was at Publix that I've had before called Dragon's Milk.
Dragon's Milk.
That's much sweeter than that one. Which is what I was expecting.
Yeah.
I was expecting it as a stout to be sweeter. But
so what's the difference between a beer and a stout?
I don't know.
Okay.
Something.
I don't know. Yeah.
Something in the process of the fermenting of things. Yeah.
It says a frothy cinnamon colored head that goes forever. I don't really know what that means. I don't really get any cinnamon.
Well, I think the head is I think when you pour it and it
foams up,
like the foam doesn't dissipate really fast, which I poured mine so smoothly that I didn't really get that.
Look at you.
Let me try now.
Yeah.
Let's get the head. Oh, there it goes. There's the cinnamon head.
Yeah. It's cinnamon colored. I guess I just assumed it would have the flavor with it.
Goes forever.
There you go.
It's gone.
It took like 2 seconds.
Everything ends.
Well, that's that.
All right, let's take a journey.
All right, let's do it.
Leave your handkerchiefs behind, ladies and gentlemen. We're going on an adventure. So, for those of you who haven't heard of the hero's journey, I feel like the Greek myths, you end up learning those, reading those in English.
Oh, yeah.
And the Odyssey is like a very classical kind of hero's journey storyline.
I actually included the Odyssey in our notes that we did before the show here. We were trying to find good examples of the different stations along the hero's journey, and I included the Odyssey in the return station. But we'll get to that later. Yeah.
Yep. So, so this is the hero's journey. It's not just like someone who came up with an idea for how to structure a story, and then because I think it became popular like in the 60s, maybe around that time, because I think it was in the 50s around when it was published.
Yeah.
And George Lucas had read it around the time of writing Star Wars. Mm-hmm. And when he read it, it was kind of what he was going for anyway, was something that had a mythological feel to it.
Yeah.
And when he read it, he rewrote his script to make it fit a lot more with the hero's journey. And so I think that, the success of Star Wars probably has propelled Joseph Campbell's, recognition of this pattern into the consciousness of storytellers, to where, people do view it as this is a storytelling structure.
Right.
Whereas what Joseph Campbell was looking at and kind of just, I don't know if discovering is the right word, but he
systematizing, maybe.
Systematizing, yeah, was that this structure has been around in storytelling from cultures that didn't talk to each other, that didn't necessarily know each other's mythology and stories, and you see a lot of these same patterns in storytelling, which is really interesting. That it's, you could talk about morality, and there's in a lot of cases in cultures, similar and shared morality across cultures with certain like fundamental things. There's also apparently fundamental things about storytelling that cultures tend to have, and so that's what Joseph Campbell was identifying, and as basically, putting forward it as like, this is something that is like jives with humanity for some reason,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really interesting, and Joseph Campbell was really onto something. He like Josh, you were saying, it's not so much a type of story as much as it is a pattern that stories take on naturally when they're good stories. You could imagine, we like seeing people climb the ladder of success. We like that sort of thing. But if nobody has any setbacks or obstacles to overcome or internal challenges or external enemies or anything like that, and it's just smooth sailing all the way up the top of the ladder, it's pretty underwhelming. And it doesn't really feel like they really earned where they were. They just kind of kept their head down, did what was right all the time. They were perfect. Nobody can relate to that character, because we never do everything perfect. And so what Joseph Campbell does here is he sort of identifies this cyclical pattern that all characters in stories and then all stories themselves will take on. And it's pretty simple, actually. You want to go into that?
Yeah. There's this video that we watched that I sent to John just to kind of be a good distillation of that, and I can post that out there on our social media page for anyone that wants to watch it. But there's another storyteller named Dan Harmon, who is famous for sitcoms. You said Community,
Rick and Morty,
yeah. And I don't know what else, but he's famous for taking that same Joseph Campbell's telling method and kind of looking at it in even more simplified terms, to benefit storytelling that isn't epic, necessary adventures. But the three in that video, there were 3 circles that they brought up that I thought were very interesting. Of, like you said, the simplicity of it. You have the top half of the circle. If you were to draw a circle on the page and draw a line horizontally, the top half could be life and the bottom half could be death. The top half could be consciousness and what you're conscious, how you're living, what you're conscious of, what you're aware of and who you are and things like that. And what you're unconscious of, things that are driving you that, are kind of beneath the surface, things that you're not dealing with, things that you aren't willing to look at, or whatever,
right.
Or that you aren't even aware of. And then you have, and this is probably more fundamental to both of these, is order and chaos. Is that the top is order. The top is things are, you have a grasp on this. You have an understanding of these things. And the bottom is you don't have a grasp on this. Things are, you're in over your head, and it's chaos. But the importance of the circle is that you're passing from, you have these thresholds that you're crossing. You're starting out in the living world, in the what you're conscious of, in the order, and you're crossing the threshold into the chaos.
Right.
And then these other thresholds along the way until you come back around to having drawn from that chaos and from the, your unconscious, thoughts and unconscious thoughts. I don't know if that's the thing. Your unconscious, like, motivations and things, and your whatever death you may have experienced or gone through to drive at life, come back to the land of the living with.
Right.
Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah. I mean, you can picture the hero's journey like the face of a clock, and if you'll want to divide the clock in half horizontally, so you want to kind of cut through at sort of 3 o'clock there, And what you'll find is that the hero begins his journey at 12 o'clock, you know, top of the hour. He begins his journey there, and he has to sort of walk out of his special world, that is the top half of the circle, and down into the chaotic world, the bottom half of the circle. He's going to encounter challenges all along the way. Some heroes' journeys actually label each hour mark with different challenges or scenes that the character might find themselves in, you know, until he reaches the very bottom of that chaotic world, and he pays an ultimate price, you know, or he loses something, or however it may be, only for him to then be transformed by that event and to walk back out of the chaotic world, a new character, a different person, having learned and changed. And that's really what the whole hero cycle is about, is the cycle of overcoming and growth and change. And it's fascinating. Like if you really crack into that, and it comes from Campbell's book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, I think was the original book that he published in that one. And it's fascinating, you know, and I would encourage you to read that.
Have you read it?
I have, actually.
I have not, actually.
Oh, no. Okay. Well, you don't really have to. I mean, you can get the whole thing. I don't think I've read the entire book because, I mean, he's a psychologist. He's kind of wordy.
Right.
But yeah, it's pretty fascinating. So yeah, good things. You know, and I was just telling you, Josh, before the show, you know, where I had my 5th and 6th grade class when I was teaching 5th and 6th grade, and I showed them a video about the hero's journey that was to sort of buttress our literature class. You know, like you said, everybody learns about that when you go into the Greek mythology and stuff. And they immediately got it. This is not a complicated subject. You know, all of our lives and our stories are patterned off of the hero's journey. And so they immediately got the context. They immediately got how it fit into the stories that they were reading, and they started to apply it to other stories that they happen to like. You know, they talk about Star Wars or something like that, and they'd start identifying the different tick marks along the hero's journey. And as a teacher, you're happy because that means that they learned your lesson. But it also just goes to show the fundamental humanness of this whole thing. You know, the fundamental reality underneath the hero's journey. So yeah, it's cool.
It's very cool. So we could just go ahead, and we kind of working somewhat from Dan Harmon's simplification, but we might also touch on, because there are some differences between what Dan Harmon sees when he thinks of, like, he calls it the story circle. It's his version of the hero's journey. There are a little bit difference from that, from like the classical hero's journey wheel, which, as John said, has a lot more steps to it that are, quote, you know, you could say, quote unquote, necessary as a part of the hero's journey. Things like meeting a mentor, that sort of thing,
right? Which
is not in Dan Harmon's thing. But if we were to go through that, that's I would say 8 steps. I mean, I only wrote down, or not, there's 8. Oh,
yeah, you got
9. I'd say 9, because you do kind of have to talk about 8 is the change, right? Master of two worlds. But then the 9 is where they're back at the ordinary world. You know, and some people call that free to live. So it's like it's not like they're not back to status quo.
Right.
There's a new status quo, but they're in the same environment in that new status quo. So yeah, if we were to start at number 1, you know, as you're listening, think about your favorite stories and think about, you know, your character. What's their ordinary world that they start in? What's their status quo that the story starts in? Because that's where all stories start. You don't start with the character most of the time in the middle of the journey. You know, that's usually, if you do, it's like, how did I get here?
Yeah.
You're probably wondering how, and then it goes back.
Right.
But you see because you want to get that sense of, like John said, you want to get that sense of the change and the progression and the growth of the character. So you have to see what the status quo is to get that. So, John, what do you got for a good status quo example from a story?
Well, in my mind,
you pick your story, any story.
Yeah, right. I mean, yeah. So it all starts in the status quo, in the normal world where things are boring You know, you can even think, you know, in terms of a fairy tale, you know, how a fairy tale picks up simple kid stories, you know, person on the farm, the princess in the tower, you know, however it might start. I mean, in my mind, it's hard to beat Lord of the Rings for the beginning. You know, it starts you right out in the Shire. I mean, you know, the movies will start you in the battle, but again, like you said, that's not truly the start of the movie. The start of the movie begins when you meet Frodo. And Tolkien and the filmmakers went to such great lengths to show that the Shire is such a normal, happy, comfortable is maybe the key word.
Right.
Comfortable place. And, you know, who would ever want to leave it? It's all perfect. And that's why, you know, it's a perfect setting to start your story in.
Right.
You know.
I like too, like even thinking about The Hobbit, you know, how Bilbo, because The Hobbit is even more of a children's story. You know, talks about, you know, adventures. Those are nasty things that make you late for dinner, you know, that, you know, this is how, and even in Lord of the Rings too, there everyone's annoyed at Gandalf because he's a disturber of the peace. You know, he's people that keeps sending people out on adventures. You know, so you have a society that not only is very ordinary and very comfortable, and cozy and things, but it's also somewhat hostile to the idea of adventure. You know, because that is a part of the classical hero's journey. Recipe is that there's going to be a refusal to the call. There's going to be a call to adventure, and there's going to be this initial refusal. That's kind of like the initial conflict, is that you're here, adventure is knocking on the door, and you're like, no, I can't do that. I can't go.
Right.
Because that's like that first kind of character progression sort of step, is that they take the step, you know, for whatever reason. You know, in Star Wars, you have Luke who, you know, he's bemoaning this ordinary world.
Right.
And he is wanting to go to the academy and learn how to be a pilot, or not learn how, but like be trained in the academy as a pilot with his friends and stuff. But he keeps being forced to stay on the moisture farm. But then when it comes time, when the call to adventure happens, he meets old Ben and finds out you're not just a normal person. You have this like history, and they get the call to adventure. The droids show up and have the message from the princess. He's like, no, I can't do that. I gotta take care of this. I gotta do that. You know, even though there's a part of him, and that's I guess part of it too, is there's always a part of them that wants the adventure, but they when it comes time, there's this resistance. I mean, Bilbo had that too. He had this Tookish part of him, you know, and even Frodo talks about in Lord of the Rings that, you know, he kind of like thinks romantically about Bilbo going off on an adventure and him doing the same thing. Right. So they have this desire sort of, but then when push comes to shove, they're like, I really would rather not.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and what I think is interesting is that, you know, you have the initial setting of the status quo, and then you have that call to adventure. Something happens that beckons them to enter into the chaotic world, or even more fundamentally, it beckons the character to change. And the character's first response is, like you were saying, is usually a refusal. Usually the character will initially say, no way. And when the character refuses, that actually exposes the part of them that needs to change by going through the special world. You know, I think about Bilbo, you know, where, you know, like you were saying, Gandalf is this disturber of the peace and nobody wants him around. And then all of a sudden these dwarves are just crashing his dinner party or making a dinner party, I guess. And he's getting frustrated and stuff. And he's too simple. He's too comfortable. He's too ordinary, you might say, at that point. And so, you know, but, you know, there's the push-pull. So he pushes back, but then the adventure pulls to him, you know, and I think the movies actually did a great job with the song about the
Misty Mountains.
The Misty Mountains, yes, thank
you.
That is kind of, you know, you can see his ears sort of perk up a little bit when he's listening to it, because something about it is just calling him to enter the special world and change that part of him that's kind of a rube, you know, or kind of a square, you know. It's fascinating that way.
That just aside, agreeing with you on that. Was a very good. They got that across well with Bilbo's character, because that is something that's very overtly said in the book, is that a Tookish part of him woke up. There was a part of him that woke up that he wasn't all Baggins, and there was another part of him that would like to go on an adventure.
Right.
And even though you don't hear the narrator saying that in the movie, you can see it when everyone's singing the hush falls and these words, these tales of these faraway realms and dragons and gold and things like that, that there's, like you said, it's calling to him. And Joseph Campbell said, I think I saw him in an interview related to this, talking about as the hero approaches this threshold, which is the next. So we've covered a little bit of the ordinary world and the inciting incident, the call to adventure. That's the whatever happens that, inciting incident is another way to say it. Whatever it is that exposes or calls the character into this adventure. Basically, the opportunity is presented, that there's an opportunity for adventure, or to leave the status quo for some reason. As they approach this threshold, the first threshold where they're actually crossing into the point of no return, where it's like you're all in at this point, both feet are in the water, that the chaotic realm rises up to meet you. So as they're approaching that, there's and I won't jump ahead into that necessarily, but as they cross that threshold, those first kind of meeting with the antagonist happens, because the chaotic realm is chaotic, and so as soon as you are approaching, it's there to kind of greet you and welcome you.
Right.
And it's interesting to think about too, like just like relating back to why this resonates with people, and how much of our lives you could take different lenses and put them on things and find interesting things about how they relate to your life. But so much of our lives are in a simplistic way. We have our comfort zone, and then we have the unknown. We have the thing of what could be, the potential that's out there. And I think that's I've heard like Jordan Peterson talk about like, do you have the chaos is like potentiality, like you reach into the chaos and you bring order out of the chaos, by making decisions and by putting structures in place and things like that. And I think that is in our own lives something that happens where we have our status quo, we're comfortable, and we have something that there's this like in the back of something nagging at us, maybe it's like, I think I could do more here. I have this desire, this longing to do this, a dream, whatever it is. Or maybe it's even just, it could just be like things just aren't working out financially here. That could be but the chaos is the chaotic realm, in that instance is the unknown. It's of going into that new job or going into this new situation, moving out here somewhere else, where I don't know anyone, things like that.
Right.
How are you going to make it work? I think that stories are just such a powerful way to like symbolically represent so much of the struggle of living,
Yeah, I like that a lot, because it isn't just the way that you would write that follows the hero's journey. Even though ideally it would, write a story, it would follow this pattern.
Right.
Really, our lives do, involving change and comfort zones and stuff. And you always hear that advice to break out of your comfort zone. And that's you getting the call to adventure over something, whatever that may be. Like you said, normal circumstances, like you could move or change jobs or try a new hobby or do something like that. It's all a call to adventure. And I like that you tied in Jordan Peterson on that one too, because Jordan Peterson is actually in the same philosophical tradition as Joseph Campbell, which all goes back to Carl Jung, like we were talking about, who really kind of formulated Jungian psychology, which has a strong emphasis on symbols and myth and how they influence, like story influences our lives and stuff. And so Jordan Peterson is no doubt well aware of the hero's journey, and it plays into almost everything he talks about. He always talks about order and chaos and symbols and myths and stuff like that. And yeah, so I think we're about at crossing the threshold, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So what's a good example that you could think of for crossing the threshold?
For Luke, it was, I think, I don't know if you agree with me or not, I was thinking about this. I think for Luke in Star Wars, it was the toasty aunt and uncle. So
I like that.
I mean, the point of no return, it seemed to be that
deep fried uncle.
Somebody's looking for something, and they killed my aunt and uncle. So I don't know if I have a choice at whether or not to go on this adventure. You know,
right?
You know, everything the bridge has been burned of going back to the ordinary world for him at that point. And so, whenever he finds his aunt and uncle killed, you know, at that point he's crossed the threshold, you know,
right.
And sure enough, not that we're going on to this step, but the first, as we said, the chaotic realm, what's beneath the surface that the hero is descending into rises up to meet them as soon as they get out in space, pretty much. They have their first confrontation with the TIE fighters, you know, and have to fend them off before they get sucked into the Death Star. So that's one, and then
that's a good one. And I think if we can pause there on the A New Hope inciting incident there, or the crossing the threshold rather.
Right.
It's interesting that the threshold, which you already mentioned, has to meet the character, because what's our temptation so often when we encounter challenges is that we shrink away because they're difficult. Nobody really wants to put in the hard work to grow. You know, if you're honest with yourself, you probably don't want to. And so oftentimes the problems have to stack up to such a level that we're forced to.
Right.
We don't have a choice anymore.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that's illustrated well in A New Hope, because he refused the call initially. When he got the transmission from Princess Leia, you know, he refused the call, and Obi-Wan is trying to sort of beckon him into this, and they have the whole thing with like the Tusken Raiders and that kind of thing. He still refuses it, but he doesn't have a choice when push comes to shove, because, you know, toasty aunt and uncle.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, that's I think that's great. And one of the examples that I wrote down, just going completely out of left field here, Jonah. In the biblical story of Jonah, you know, you could say maybe when he gets on the boat to try and run away from the call of God, but really I think it's when he gets swallowed by the fish.
Right.
He there's no going back anymore, you know, and that's just a memorable one for me.
Yeah, that's definitely, as a very big fan of Tolkien, he had a big belief in mythology, speaking to something deeper, put in us by our Creator. And he called Christianity the true myth, you know, and it's definitely really, really interesting to try and put this hero circle with the story of the incarnation.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, because it fits really well. And to even think of it as, you know, I mean, the Bible calls Jesus the last Adam, or the second Adam, you know, this federal head, this representation of humanity that you can come under if you follow him. If you become a follower of Jesus and submit to him, then you come under his headship as a representation of humanity, instead of Adam, the first Adam that who failed, right? Yeah. So yeah, it's definitely interesting, because to think of like humanity's salvation being born up in a hero's journey type of struggle, you know, belly of the beast, literally in the tomb, you know.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome. And two things come to mind when you say that. First of all is that, you know, the Greek myths or the Norse myths, in the case of Tolkien or something like that, they might follow the stories of the gods and stuff. They might follow the hero's cycle, because they're entering the chaotic world either for themselves or for each other, the other gods.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I can't think of another quote unquote myth where a god follows into the chaotic world for us.
Right.
I can't think of another one that does that. And that's part of what makes Christianity so fascinating, is that it really turns the trope on its head. It's a selfless God, who would be willing to go into the chaotic world, incarnate, die, right? We talked about the bottom of the abyss there, the belly of the beast, for us. Yeah. Not for any kind of gain that he could have on his own. And so I think about that, and then I think about what the Apostle Paul says, and I'm going to butcher it, but he talks about us being glorified in Christ, provided that we suffer with him, is what he says. And so there's a sense that Christ completes the hero's journey and then beckons his followers to participate in his hero's journey, which will involve getting the call to adventure and then going into the chaotic world and then receiving persecution, suffering with him to be glorified with him later. And so it's just really interesting when you see that.
It is very interesting. Yeah. And that's the big thing of, personally, you may not be, if you're listening to this still, you may not be here for this. You may not have You may not have tuned in.
That would be my fault.
No, it would not be. I definitely just took us there. But no, I'm acknowledging that you may not be here to necessarily think about, something like Christianity, the truth of it, all those sorts of things right at this moment. But just think about this idea of this story that is just so universally across all cultures, resonates so deeply with people. It is objectively what people are craving, because it is objectively what people are going. Whenever it's executed well, people are enjoying the story. When it's executed poorly, something feels wrong, and you might not know why, but it's because there's an element of this story that is so essential, that's so fundamental to how we interact and view the world in our own lives, for whatever reason, whether we're conscious of it or not. And then the idea that the primary, you could say, storyteller steps into that reality in order to fulfill that story, not supremely or alone, only to gain something for themselves, which Jesus, of course, did. It's in Christian theology and the tradition was going to gain a people for himself. And Philippians talks about what, his name being lifted above the name of every name, but that that victory and the inheritance that he was seeking was for the salvation of all of humanity. That we're all going to, if we follow him, acknowledge him as the one who saves us from the chaos of sin, the chaos of death, that if we acknowledge him, believe that he did conquer, that he did follow this story circle all the way up to back to life on our behalf, that somehow he's embodying and fulfilling this monomyth, is pretty, I think, very compelling, whether you even believe it or not. You just have to admit that, I don't know, gives me chills. It did something for C.S. Lewis, that's for sure.
Yeah.
That was the key that unlocked the door for C.S. Lewis.
He talked about how you would see similarities in a lot of the pagan religions to what Christianity talks about. For example, like dying and rising gods is a fairly common myth all over the world. And he called them the good dreams. Basically, it was something that was a stirring deep within the human soul that desires to see that knows something is right there. And so as we're talking about this, I think, you make a really compelling point for what it is that we see something in the Christian myth. And I'll use that term myth not to say it's not true.
Right.
It's myth in the truest sense, that it's the grand story, basically. Just to be clear, we see something really compelling in that, and something about it just makes sense, and I think that's really interesting,
If we can just get out of our way, right? If we can just get out of our way of whatever is blocking us or blocking you, from recognizing something compelling about this, as you said, true myth, it's very mystical to me, but
Yeah.
and why I enjoy fantasy so much. And I actually a little aside before we continue on the story circle, I wrote down another little circle because we talked about life on top, death on the bottom, conscious, unconscious, order, chaos. I wrote seen and unseen. The fantasy circle is what I wrote down. So like whenever you are in a story, not just like your regular story, your rom-com, your Great Expectations, but when you're in the fantasy story circle, right, there is something that happens because you are descending into this chaotic realm. Would be the story, would be the fantasy world. You've got these world building elements that, like, you don't know how does gravity work in this world. What's the magic system? What's the social system, the politics? It's all throwing you off balance. You're thrown off balance because it's all very fantastical and different. And so when you're crossing into that unseen, not the unseen, but then you're crossing into that chaotic world, what you are having a greater ability to stories that do it well to do is actually become more aware of reality, because you are becoming more aware that are unseen forces that have a big impact in your life. You are becoming more aware that there is fundamental, struggle of good and evil that is not just determined by your own effort and hard work, but that grace has to be a part of it. That was the big thing with Tolkien, and the way the Lord of the Rings concludes, especially. I mean, even the Hobbit. I mean, the eagles come at the end both times, but in Lord of the Rings, it wasn't Frodo's. He didn't muster up just enough self-control to throw the ring into the fire.
Right. He failed.
And it was building that. You knew it couldn't be, he's not just going to toss it in at the end, but you didn't know what was going to happen. What saved all of Middle-earth wasn't Frodo, even though he got it all the way there. At the very end, it was the fact that Gollum just tripped. And that there's
coincidentally,
an aspect of that some people you could find as dissatisfying. But the point of that was goes back to Fellowship of the Ring and Gandalf's quote: "There are other powers at work than that of evil." And that is an encouraging thought. And that is the example of the seen and unseen, that when you are crossing into a fantasy story, you leave back your ordinary world behind. You answer the call to go into this unseen, chaotic world, and you have the ability to, in that chaos, be willing and able to bring something back with you into the seen world about what's true about reality. And that's something I love about myth, and I love it about fantasy, and and I think that's why it resonates with a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely it does. I was just thinking as you were talking, it's interesting at the end of Return of the King, they're in Mount Doom, they're ready to do all this. Just ask yourself, what character succeeds? Really none of them do. Frodo fails, as we already talked about. He says the ring is mine and kind of claims that for himself. Gollum also fails, even though he, like you said, by his quote unquote coincidental trip that he has, he falls into the lava. He fails. It's not like he musters up his own strength and does it. Sam fails to protect Frodo at a certain point, basically. The rest of the Fellowship, they're all engaged in their battles, which they know they're about to die. So there's the unseen element that all these things just come together just right. Gollum happens to bite the fingers off Frodo there and basically jump into the lava, fall into the lava. And then at that point, Frodo's awake. So Frodo achieved what he was supposed to do. And then Sam could protect him. As everything's falling apart, he can grab him, wrap his arm around his shoulder and just pull him right out of Mount Doom. And then suddenly the tides turn. So the Fellowship then wins. And it's the unseen world that's actually giving them the victory the entire time. And I love that. That gives me chills to think about. So where are we at now?
I would say we can generally cover the fourth step is after you've crossed the threshold, you're going to have trials, you're going to have failures, you're going to have successes. Basically, the hero in that time is adapting to this chaotic world. They're learning how to function. So you have like Luke, you have, we already mentioned the TIE fighters, right? They fight the TIE fighters. They get into the Death Star and they're figuring out how to make things work with, okay, how are we going to get the princess? Okay, well, let's get the stormtroopers. Let's disguise ourselves. So you have these, different trials and these different ways that they are overcoming or, failing and then overcoming those trials. So 4 is a little, you could have so if it was a superhero movie, like let's imagine like a Spider-Man movie, because there's only a few of those. You've seen Spider-Man like learn his powers like how many times, but it's always for in Spider-Man, it's always the point in the movie where he's got his powers. He's maybe practicing with his powers. So it's before the big confrontation. He's having little confrontations here along the way, and those are the step for the searching and the adapting to the chaotic world.
Right.
Did you have anything down for that or?
I had some. So, have you ever read the Space Trilogy?
C.S. Lewis?
Yeah.
No. I need to get to it.
Okay. Gotcha. So Paralandra is the second one, and that's my favorite one. And I think that has the most clear example of the challenges. Since you haven't read it, I won't get into everything, but basically it's just, he has to face he finds out who his adversary is. He's kind of engaged in these battles with his adversary, which escalates or de-escalates, I guess, rather, down into that lowest point. And that's really the point of step 4, is not that it's really like a static station where they stay. It's kind of a descending sort of thing where the conflict keeps ramping up as the character's morale is ramping down, and it's leading you to that sort of what is that, step 5, I guess, the belly of the beast, as you call it. I don't know if you want to go there yet, but
yeah, no, that's good. Definitely the belly of the beast. So, if you're imagining a circle with us, or maybe you've gone and like Googled it and you're looking at it, it's going to be opposite where we're at now. Is opposite the top. So the top is ordinary world, status quo, and the bottom is going to be, it's the valley of the shadow of death. It's it's where everything is kind of falling apart. I call it, or I've seen it called the Dark Night of the Soul. That's where the quote death, maybe not literal, but figurative death is occurring for the character so that they can be reborn and that sort of thing. So, I think of like with Star Wars and the belly of the beast. They're in the Death Star, right? So that's already the belly of the beast in a way, right?
Literally.
You're literally in the worst part. Like, it's not just like you're like under siege by the Empire. You're in there.
Yep.
Their monster, that's destroying planets. And, the hardest part of that, they've come for the princess, right? So that's what their call was to adventure was, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Right.
Right. But now in the belly of the beast is where you have the princess now. You have what you came for. You got it, right? It's a little bit, and this is where Dan Harmon kind of splits it up a little bit, but you have to pay the price. So it's going to cost you something. So that's where everything's going wrong in the belly of the beast. And that's where Obi-Wan is fighting Darth Vader, and he's the mentor, and I think this is where I would put the belly of the beast.
Yeah.
For Star Wars.
For sure.
You could put it somewhere else if someone else could put it somewhere else. But Obi, it seems like to me like the mentor dying and they barely make it out alive, and they've seen Darth Vader and that sort of thing. It's kind of like this is the darkest part of it. Or I mean, you could even go to the trench run. Maybe the trench run gets pretty dark, right? Because you got everybody.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, but yeah. So the Belly Beast, like, what would you put for example for Belly the Beast
for Star Wars?
Or well, not necessarily Star Wars, but if you had anything.
Yeah, I mean, for Star Wars, I definitely thought of the death of Obi-Wan, but I guess you could also maybe put that a little bit higher in the cycle too. Like that might be what
I've seen it put, because like in Joseph Campbell, the death of the mentor is often like a lot earlier,
right?
Than
well, because that's really also one of Joseph Campbell's steps that we didn't really include on this one, but meeting the mentor is the archetype of the story. Somebody has to lead your character onto that growth. Gandalf, yeah, exactly. Whoever it may be. So I guess you could put that even as kind of like that's another facet of crossing the threshold in a sense. Like that kind of pushes them into the real conflict. They're not just random soldiers after the princess just because they think that's a jolly good thing to do. They've now joined the war at that point. When Obi-Wan dies, they're like, all right, now we're serious about this. We're going to take on the Death Star. We're going to do all this kind of stuff. Yeah, you could definitely say that. I think later on, you get that famous, no, I'm your father. With Luke and Darth Vader, that very famous scene there. Spoiler alert if nobody's seen that. But that's definitely a Belly of the Beast. And you can actually see, even visually in that movie. Which one is that actually?
That's episode 5. Is
that episode 5?
That's near the end of episode 5, yeah.
Sure. Because that's another good point, is when you have a series, like a trilogy or something like that, you're going to have larger and smaller hero's journeys, basically. Like the large hero's journey of Star Wars is the defeat of Emperor Palpatine and bringing down or I don't know, did that actually happen now? That's the question.
Let's not go there, please.
Oh man, I have no idea what they were thinking. Anyway, so that's like the larger one, is the bringing down of the Empire, and then there's a larger Belly of the Beast, which is Darth Vader sacrificing himself to do so.
Right.
But then each individual movie has their own little hero's journey in it. And so I think for this series, if you're going to go Belly of the Beast, you're definitely at the moment where Luke learns that Darth Vader is actually his father. And visually, you can see it played out well. Remember, this is like that scene where they're going through all the different like air ducts and vents and stuff like that. They're in an actual bottomless pit. He's hanging over this giant chasm of darkness. It is literally an abyss that he's hanging over.
Right.
And he's going through these vents and stuff almost like entrails. Like he's literally like getting swallowed by this evil thing. It's dark. There's not really much music that goes on there. It's lonely feeling. And so even
his entire world has just been shattered.
Right.
In episode 5, whenever he finds out my entire identity is like in question.
Right.
Who even am I?
Right.
And this is my father.
Right. And so like attacking the identity of the character, and that gets into the conscious and unconscious sides of the circle, where the unconscious, your unconscious mind, your id, I think is the pop psychology term for it, that's your identity. That's how you view yourself. That's the things that make you.
Internal, external struggle.
Right. Just being completely shattered. And so for the larger series, I think that's definitely the abyss moment. It's right there. When he's there, he's already lost his arm, and now he doesn't even know who he is. He's literally in an abyss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. Yeah.
And then the little one in Fellowship of the Ring is when Gandalf sacrifices himself to get them out of that situation that they're in. With the Balrog. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking too, I guess I've seen a lot too down, and I don't know, and once again, Dan Harmon, he like was trying to simplify things. So maybe this may go somewhere else in like the more detailed Joseph Campbell circle, but there's usually a temptation, like meeting the goddess thing, where it's like basically there's some kind of temptation. And, I was thinking about Anakin Skywalker. I was thinking about not to talk too much about the prequels, but if you think about Anakin Skywalker and his story as a hero's journey, what happens to the hero? The hero is going to face in the belly of the beast this some kind of temptation, right? Because you have this external threat, right? That's kind of coming to a head, but the real threat, the real conflict, is the internal one that's happening. Mm-hmm. That is bringing out, right, or causing them to have to be forced to face. And when Anakin is in the belly of the beast, you could say, like for his overarching story, you could say he's maybe in the belly of the beast in episode 3, right? Whenever this ultimate temptation of like saving his wife, right, is there. Mm-hmm. And this identity crisis has come to a full head, mm-hmm. And he fails that test. Mm-hmm. The hero is supposed to conquer that test. What happens when he fails that test? He is basically descends further, mm-hmm. even into, might say, hell itself, and is stuck there, mm-hmm. for years. Mm-hmm. And then I would say his hero's journey picks up again. Yeah. When his son descends into the abyss where he's at, and finds him. And that's whenever he has the opportunity to continue to make it out of this abyss finally, and to, go these other steps to get what he was seeking. He didn't get to save his wife, but he got to save his son. Mm-hmm. He didn't get to, live this happy long life, but he got to return back to the light side. He got to come back to the status quo of being on the light side, being a Jedi, because he's now being found as a Force ghost in the last movie, so to go back to that, I just think that was something I was thinking about. I think I watched another video, and it made this little off comment about failing the test and spending like however long in the abyss or whatever. And it made me think that's really interesting too, to like think about in your life or whatever, the tests that, in the chaotic realm, that you sometimes do face temptation, and you do face opportunities to basically abandon, mm-hmm. your identity, or become a part of the chaos instead of in the chaos, kind of solidifying your identity, who you are, and coming forward out of that. Sometimes the chaos shatters you. Yeah. And if it does, you get stuck there. And you can think about that. People, maybe you have spent a time in your life, in the chaos realm, in some sort of like figurative purgatory, you could say. Right. Because when that dark night of the soul came, you weren't able to rise to the occasion. That's not to say that in a shameful way or anything, but just as a way of understanding and thinking about reality, the story of your life, and how stories work. Just something that's interesting to me to think about, because the hero's journey is all about the hero, making it through that circle. But right. What happens when the hero doesn't, right. for some reason? Yeah. That's really thought provoking when you say it that way. And I'm thinking in terms of Star Wars as the illustration there. So would you say that Revenge of the Sith Episode 3, when he doesn't really kill her in that moment, but he like chokes Padme, right? At that point when Obi-Wan goes to confront him, they're you talked about even down to hell. They're literally in this fire lava planet, which is right. supposed to look like hell. And so you might say the moment right after that, when he gets like disembodied, basically just mm-hmm. hacked to pieces, all that kind of stuff, that could be an abyss. You could look at the point where he allows his evil to not only kill one family member, but almost kill the second with Luke, at the very end, when, the Emperor is just shocking him and, doing that whole thing, and he's just crying out, and he's kind of just standing there watching, but you can see something is kind of shifting in him.
You could probably describe all of those moments as being abysmal, abysmal,
right.
I guess.
And it's almost in some sense like, a cycle.
Yeah.
Temptation cycle, right? Because he's stuck down there in the belly of the beast where the temptation happens.
Yeah.
And he's continually, and I think even like some of the like legends and, comics and things like that chronicle this kind of trapped feeling at times that he had or expressed of like the way the emperor would manipulate him, but he would have this sometimes opportunities where he would be reminded of his old self, be reminded of who he used to be, reminded of what he was striving for and things like that, and yet continue to go down the same path and continue to retread that same failure. And yeah, that's a good point that, even though there's the temptation there in episode 3, there's, like you said, also still yet again, it's like he got not a second chance, but
yeah,
the opportunity shows itself again. Here we are again at this familiar crossroads. Are you going to stay here a little longer in purgatory or not? Go a little deeper. And at that point, something, thankfully, I say thankfully, obviously it didn't really happen, but I think it's okay to say that even in stories because it mirrors. I'm thankful that the primal, sort of instinctive part of him knowing this is his son and seeing his son, how he's responding to this temptation. Mm-hmm. He's in his own temptation right there with the emperor. It awakens something primal in him and intuitive that he just goes with and doesn't, think about,
right.
And gets him out of this where he's stuck,
Awesome.
But yeah.
And I mean, one of the themes that you can see running through all of that, and I think we're kind of hovering over this, abyss stage here for a while because it really is kind of the pivotal point in the hero cycle is really this one, because what you start to see in all of these stories, and it's one of those areas where we were talking about, with Christians would say it's because this is the story that all of our stories conform to, basically. We start to notice themes of sacrifice are always at the bottom of the hero cycle. They lose something they love, maybe even their lives, something like that. Think about even in Star Wars. Okay, the main character in both trilogies, the old and the oldest trilogy and then the prequel trilogy, both of them, the main character is Anakin. It's not really Luke. Luke is kind of, he's kind of, I don't know, a protagonist, but he's not necessarily the main character. So if the main character is Anakin, then the story is Anakin's redemption is basically what it is, the giant arc of Anakin's redemption. And what it takes is somebody going in willing to get themselves shocked to near death in order to get them out of darkness. And you start to notice that themes, almost messianic, Messiah type themes come in of somebody saving you. You can't save you're stuck. Right. You can't save yourself. Somebody goes in and essentially kills themselves for you to get out. And I just think that's awesome.
On the line.
Right.
I mean, when Luke throws away the lightsaber,
right,
he's fully committed.
Yeah, he's embracing death, whether he dies or not. He's embracing.
He's just like, this is the Jedi way,
right?
And this is, and I mean, he has his father's redemption in his sights. That's, I love that you talk about that. It's talk about Luke as a savior type character, not just for like the galaxy, but for his father, because salvation costs something.
Yeah,
and that is, I think, such a powerful thing to have. Once he. In episode 6, like that is just once Luke has kind of come to grips with this is my father. It's like when you're down in the abyss and you're like, why am I here? This is hard. This is horrible. I want to get out. And then you realize there's other people down here. There's someone else here that needs to be saved. There's someone else who's going through the same thing. And Luke just kind of decides, oh, this is why I'm down here.
Mm-hmm.
This is why I'm here. It's to save my father, and he basically just decides, stubbornly decides, I'm going to believe there's good in him if it costs me my life,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm not going to save my own life by going down the same path my father did.
Right.
But it's really is not for himself. And in my opinion, it's all about his father's right there in the room.
Yeah.
It's for him to see that.
And then the theme of sacrifice immediately switches to Darth Vader, who then decides to actually sacrifice himself for his son. And so that's interesting how themes of sacrifice are always in this abyss. You know? And if you'll notice, we're at the exact opposite pole of where we began. We began in a comfortable, ordinary thing. But you'll notice that in both cases, the characters are stuck. They're not able to move. They're facing their biggest challenge, or they're just stubborn and unwilling to move. And so we actually see that, like I said earlier, like we were talking, the hero cycle is about change. And so creation and destruction and positive and negative, it's all forms of change in growth. Mm-hmm. And all of it is necessary for your growth. So really, the enemy is being stuck. The enemy is not changing. The enemy is stasis, basically. Whether you're at the bottom of the hero cycle or the top, that's what needs to change. It's just interesting to see how that fits together.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's always something in us that can be better.
Right.
There's always something in us that can change.
Right.
Even if you're comfortable there, and even if there's something in you, even if you've had a lot of growth in your life,
mm-hmm.
As a human being, there will always be something more growth that can happen. Mm-hmm. So I think that is appropriate. And that is something, it's so interesting too, that characters that don't change. I mean, you have stories that are there for you to watch, a character that's pretty static do something really cool, like Sherlock Holmes, right? Sure. It's like, let's watch Sherlock Holmes solve a really, the change. Sherlock Holmes. The change is different. The change isn't about the character, but at the same time, when you talk about people when people love stories with characters, rich characters, mm-hmm. a lot of times it's because those characters have just dramatic development and growth mm-hmm. and change, because we kind of intuitively understand the importance of that and the value of it. Yeah.
If you want to take a second and we could scale it back from the more epic kind of thing, if you even want just a common example, like The Office, think about the TV show The Office. So that follows a hero cycle. Nobody's dying and being reborn, or heroes or magic, nothing like that. But The Office is fundamentally a character about Jim. Not even so much about Michael, even though he is, again, kind of the main character. Jim is the one who goes through the hero cycle more than anybody. Mm-hmm. I think they all kind of do a little bit. But, Jim has his problem. He has this unrequited, crush, that situation. He has to basically cross the threshold and confess his feelings for Pam. Pam turns him down, and that's kind of his abysmal moment there. Mm. It's when he decides to leave. He can't handle it anymore, mm. and then he comes back around on that one, so it's you can see it everywhere. It's not just the epic stories, it's every story.
True. Yeah, it's true. Yeah. And even like when you see the character, Michael is not a character that's developing a whole lot early on, but as he does and as he gets to his point in this series where, spoiler alert, he leaves mm-hmm. the series, he does go through a similar, character development cycle that you could definitely line up, and at least with the more simplified, Dan Harmon version, with this hero's journey kind of cycle. And
that kind of exposes some of the problems to the later series too, is because basically the important characters all had their hero cycles already. Mm-hmm. And so the show writers were left kind of scratching their heads and going, okay, what do we do now? Who else can we give a hero cycle to? And they started pulling out random background characters like Dwight, who's not really a background character, but he's pretty static.
How dare you, sir? But, well, he, yeah.
He's not really like...
So I think, I would push back and say, so I like season 9 is very good in my opinion, but
I don't think I ever watched it, honestly.
no, well, season 8 wasn't good,
Yeah.
and like
I couldn't get through it,
and well, a lot of season 8 wasn't good, but when Michael left, it was very hard to follow. But I think what I would kind of agree with, like simultaneously agree and disagree with you about, is that so the characters are static because you have this like central sort of through line story.
Right. They're foil,
which is the Jim and Pam love story, right? Mm-hmm. And then once that has come to, mostly its fulfillment, then they start taking the characters that were static and making them all of a sudden, they're not static characters, they're characters that need to change.
And it just feels very different.
Yeah. And it did change. Yeah, right. Dwight changes very much, from being the kind of just annoying character that Jim gets to play pranks on,
right,
to by the end of the show, everybody's best friends, right, for the most part. Because the show had to kind of change. There you go. Grow. Yeah. It went into the chaotic realm of, anyway. But yeah, so once we finally get out of the belly of the beast, so after you've gotten what you've came for, what would you put for? I guess we've kind of touched on it with the sacrifice, right? That's really, you're paying the price. You've in Star Wars, you're paying the price. Whether you would put it with the belly of the beast with Obi-Wan versus Darth Vader, and Obi-Wan pays the price. You've lost your mentor, or you could put it with the heavy losses in the trench run. Mm-hmm. The belly of the beast could be that as well. Or like you said, with we have Luke in the Emperor's throne room, and
right, the
price that he has paid there by willingly laying down his life, even though he didn't lose it, and then Darth Vader laying down his own life. That's what comes out of it. Because of that, a lot of times it's because of the price that's paid that what you received was not exactly what you were expecting, because you had to leave something behind. You had to lose something.
I really like that trope, that something the characters always wanted, it turns out that actually wasn't what they wanted. You can think about in The Hobbit or something. Bilbo's main motivation is that he wants this whole thing to be over, basically. He wants to go back to his quiet life, and he wants all that. He realizes after a certain point that what he actually wanted was to be a different person. He thinks he just wants to go back to his quiet life and all that kind of stuff. What he realizes, though, is that it's actually a lot more deep, a lot deeper, a lot more fundamental than what he's even aware of. And so I find that kind of ironic thing, that's always very satisfying. And the one that comes to my mind actually is Aladdin. Where he tells the genie what he wants, and he wants to be this prince so that way he can get Jasmine and all that kind of stuff. Right. And in the end, it requires him not having any of that to actually succeed at what he needs, and so I always find that kind of satisfying to watch.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and I mean, in terms of like when you're thinking of characters like motivations and stuff, you always, oftentimes you're looking at their needs versus their wants and juxtaposing them. They have this thing they want, but then they have the thing they actually need. That's what you're developing is they keep wanting this thing, but then what the change that happens with them in them is realizing that the thing they wanted was really kind of a surface level thing compared to what they actually needed, which they'll get. They'll get what they need. They won't necessarily get what they want.
Well, there was a famous philosopher that once said, you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you can get what you need.
Who was that again?
Mick Jagger.
Oh, yeah. Great
philosopher.
Yes, yes. Yeah. So then after the heavy price, they return. All is well. Everything's fine, or is it?
No, it is. Yeah.
Yes. Well, I mean, what would you put for this part? Because, so I think a lot of times in stories, there is a bit more storytelling. I mean, falling action happens pretty quickly in stories, but
I love the film, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah.
After Aslan has come back from the dead, and he has this kind of quiet moment with Lucy and Susan and all that kind of stuff. And he tells him to get on his back. We got work to do, that kind of thing. Goes, he wakes up all the statues. He does this great thing. And then he shows up on the battlefield that's raging, and he's like on the top of the cliff, and he just roars. And you know, as soon as he does, exactly what the outcome is going to be.
Right.
You know, you can see the White Witch suddenly like turn pale, whiter. You know,
right.
I don't know. And you can tell that it's over. You know, that's, in my mind, when I think of Victorious Return, that's what comes to my mind immediately, is that roar. You know, the sacrifice has been paid. The price has been paid. Sacrifice has been made. Everybody's at their lowest, and that's when the return comes in and strikes. You know, and you could think about Lord of the Rings also with the eagles, you know, swooping in. And I know there's that like internet meme kind of thing of, well, why didn't they just ride the eagles all the way there?
Right.
And that shows how people don't understand story. You know, you can't have your characters just ride eagles from point A to point B, you know.
Right.
You need them to struggle, you know, but they get that grace, like you were saying. They're basically about to die. It seems like belly of the beast, it's at its worst, and the eagles come in, swoop in, and pick them up, and they return. You know,
right?
Yeah.
So would you say the return is kind of like, you know, after after all the struggle, all the growth, the price has been paid, you know, something has, whatever they've been seeking, they've gotten it at the heavy price, but basically, is it like the fruit? It's like you're getting to see the fruit of the journey almost.
I think so, yeah.
Because it's like before they go back home, you've got to see what they're capable of now.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to see the example of, you know, and this is a little bit ahead of, in terms of like Dan Harmon, where he puts, you know, 7 is return, then 8 is
change.
Is the change.
But they're connected.
But I think they're connected. The master of two worlds is, you see how the change that they've undergone has made them this master of two worlds that is able to fully conquer this final, whatever maybe the final battle was. Sometimes, a lot of times in stories, I mean, it's not even that they gained a new power or that they got a new weapon, but it's literally a character change. It's literally something clicks.
Yes.
You know, something clicks, and now a lot of times it's something they were carrying with them the whole time, or something that was kind of being foreshadowed, that you've got to kind of come to terms with this and realize this is true. And then when it clicks, that's when they're the master of two worlds. That's when they become
characters fit.
That's when Iron Man snaps his fingers.
Right.
You know, spoiler alert.
Okay, so I know that scene. Yeah. Yeah.
But, you know, it's like something crystallizes, and it all kind of comes together there really quickly. You know, but you get the chance to see them as a master of two worlds.
Have you ever seen the British movie Hot Fuzz?
I have not, but you mentioned it on the last time you were on the podcast.
Oh, did I really?
Yeah.
It's a very meaningful movie for me, obviously. No, that has a great return at the end, and it's kind of combined with the change. Fits in perfectly, defeats the bad guys, even symbolically. You know, the entire movie takes place in this small town, and there's these kind of two forces: a force for law and a force for kind of chaos, I guess. Yeah, or force for evil.
Evil order,
you call it. Yeah, something evil order. Yeah. And they're literally fighting over a model of the village that they're in. So it's like one of those tiny little models. They're literally fighting over it. So visually, it's all there. You know, it's very on the nose. You know, and it's a comedy movie. But you know, he's this big city London cop, you know, hotshot kind of person who goes to a small town and thinks it's beneath him the entire time in the movie. And then finally at the end, they have this big battle. He wins. They fight over the town, literally. And they come back and they say, hey, it's time for you to come back to London. And he says, no, actually, I like it here now. And that's kind of what I think encapsulates the return mixed with the change step is sort of the idea that characters have grown into the world. You know, that they were forced into, basically. They're no longer fighting it. They are different, better people, you know, and they come full circle. That's really where the kind of saying comes from in a sense, is that they come full circle, right?
Circle.
Yeah. So that's a good one, but I don't think you can honestly top Return of the King for the return. It's
Literally,
it's in the title.
It's in the title.
But the moment that really summarizes it for me, you have all these mini returns, but the moment that really summarizes it for me is when they are back in the Shire, all the hobbits, and they're kind of sitting at the table in the pub, and everybody's just carrying on around them. There's just people being goofy and drinking and that kind of thing. And they just kind of look at each other and shrug because they're like, nobody knows what we did, but it doesn't matter. And you can tell that they've outgrown that ordinary world.
Right.
They're not fit for it anymore.
Yeah.
And it's so poignant that they're not fit for that world that's the moment that the elves and the hobbits, or at least Frodo, they're being ushered onto that boat to sail away. They're literally, they're not fit for the world anymore. And so they have to go, and so I think Return of the King summarizes that perfectly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too. I think going into the final step, you would say the change, the Master of Two Worlds, once they've mastering the two worlds, the two worlds of the chaotic realm and the order, the realm of order, right? They've crossed back into the realm of order now, and they're now free to live. That's the coming back, free to live, new status quo. It's coming back up to the top of the circle, so then another adventure can happen. But because that's where it goes, whenever the new status quo becomes the ordinary world of the sequel, whatever the sequel is, it's like, well, that's no longer the satisfactory moment of change. Now you need to grow more. But the point of that part is that either they've come back to where they started exactly, and then you get to see, like, and as you mentioned, that what's the how do they fit now, because then it really gives you that image of the character growth, the progression. Or it's a new status quo, it's at the end of Guardians of the Galaxy, you have Peter Quill and the Guardians are on the new ship, or not on the ship, on the ship with a new paint job. It's all fixed up, and what should we do next? A little bad, a little good, bit of both, and then they're sailing off. So that's the new status quo. Is it's similar to where he started, being kind of a scoundrel, but now he's got this like family now. You could think of like. With the Hobbit, it's really on the nose too, because it's there and back again. So he's literally sits down and is in his home and everything. But, he's got this gold that's with him and that sort of thing that he doesn't really fit anymore because he's just come back from this huge adventure while they're selling off all his stuff. And
that's growth. There too, that growth that the characters have, they're now larger than the ordinary world. They're kind of larger than life at that point. I think that's where a lot of movies or books can go wrong when they make a bad sequel, is that they forget that their characters are different, and essentially they
set them back too much.
Exactly, they basically just plop them back into an ordinary world and say, well, let's just start over again, learning the same lessons that they've already learned. And so masterfully done in Lord of the Rings, because, and the Hobbit, the whole universe, I guess. You have Bilbo who does his whole thing, and then we pick up in Fellowship of the Ring, and Bilbo is the weird dude who's just kind of always on adventures and telling stories and scaring people, and eventually he's the one who says at Return of the King, I think I'm quite ready for another adventure, because he's learned, and so they didn't. How unsatisfying would Fellowship of the Ring be if basically it was like, and then Bilbo was in his comfortable house and he didn't want to leave anymore, and like that? How unsatisfying would that be? Because it's like we went with him, like we changed with him as we went through all of these movies, and then we watch him not change, and I think it's kind of it's kind of indicative of poor writing that sequels will oftentimes just drop your characters into an ordinary world again, just to restart the hero cycle. They won't pick up sort of as a result of the last hero cycle, here is where your hero is now, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that's so critical, I think, to making a good sequel, is knowing that the characters have changed, and so they're going to have new growth and new challenges, but it won't be the same ones that they already experienced.
Yeah, we just actually, a couple episodes ago, we just did an episode on sequels, talking about, you know, what's a good sequel, what's a bad sequel, you know, what is important in a sequel, a satisfying sequel.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things we said was it needs to feel justified, right? So if you just set your characters back, you know, just have them backslide a bunch and to where it's like they're just relearning all the same lessons, you know, just different setting, different window dressing, you know, then it feels worse because you were so satisfied with the way the first one ended. And it's like you just, you know, messed up their life a little more so that just to have a sequel, you know. But whenever it feels justified, somehow, like you said, it arises out of what they achieved in the first one, or that, you know, something along those lines. Then it feels like it's necessary that this story be told, this sequel be told, because there is actually more story to be told.
When you just, like you said, you just mess up a character's life for the sake of messing up a character's life and having a sequel. You know, when you do that, it's kind of a slap in the face to the audience, because movies or books, any kind of entertainment like that, any story, is inherently symbolic. And what a good symbol does is it draws the audience into participation with it. And so that's what the movie does, is we are like Bilbo in the beginning of The Hobbit. We are, you know, kind of curmudgeonly, I guess, stuck in our ways, and we have our routines, and life is good, but not great, but it's safe, but, you know, but not exciting. And so we're just like him. And then we go through 3 movies of watching him grow and change, and it inspires us to do the same. And whether consciously or unconsciously, we're going to be thinking about our own circumstances. We're going to be thinking of ourselves like, man, I don't want to be a Bilbo anymore. I want to be somebody that answers the call of adventure. And so we change with the character, because that's what, like I said, symbols do. They draw you into participation with them. And so when you just sort of reset the clock, as it were, for a sequel, and you're like, well, here's the same old character, we're just going to do the same thing again, it's treating the audience like they didn't grow enough, or they didn't change, or it's discounting the kind of growth that they encouraged in the first one and just said, well, let's just do it again. You know, and it destroys the meaning of symbol, which kind of shakes the foundations of what a movie actually is, in my opinion.
Well, so we made it back. We have.
I've changed.
I've changed. I know. I'm glad to be out of this chaotic realm. Nasty down there. Lots of, you know, eldritch horrors and things. But many armed monsters.
Stout.
Yeah. But but yeah, so that was definitely, man, that was fun going through that.
Yeah.
And I think hope that everyone that listened, that you found something you resonate with, thinking of stories you care about, even ones that aren't fantastical or sci-fi or whatever, that all stories, you know, have the same thing, this character moving from the ordinary into the chaotic, facing this crisis point at the bottom, coming out a different person. They have to change to be capable of conquering whatever the conflict or struggle is that was inciting them to get on the adventure in the first place. You know, so, well, thanks for coming on and
thanks for
filling in.
Yeah.
We'll have to have you on again. You know, I don't know what your schedule's like, but we'll have to have you on for at least one, if not more, Narnia episodes, because I know that you will step our Narnia game up a notch.
Yeah.
In helping us understand the mind of C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
But
well, I'm excited. So let me know.
All right. Well, as we say, and it hurts just a little bit that Jeremiah's not here to say it with me, but as we say on the at the end here, this has been a Bridge of Two podcast, a far, far away bridge. Oh, you hurt me so bad, John.
Sorry.
You didn't say it with me.
I didn't know.
I know you didn't know. It's okay.
A far, far away bridge.
Thank you.
Is that
Thank
the line?
you.
Okay.
That's it.
There you go.
Feel a little better.
Yeah.
A little healed.
There you go. That was your abysmal moment.